Hello and welcome back to the Backlot Box Office brought to you by Backlot 605. I am Brian Mensing. I am one of your hosts here for the Backlot Box Office. Joining me as always is our great contributing writer to Coming Soon, Mr. Derrick Veurink. How you doing this evening there, Derrick?
Pretty good, you?
I'm doing pretty good. I guess I can't complain. It's been a big week this week for the box office, I would say. So,
Oh
um,
yeah.
you and I got to experience some big screen stuff going on this week, and we definitely want have a good week for us to talk about that here. How was your theater going experience this week?
Pretty good. I quasi sandwiched it with viewings of Dune, of course, because you and I went to the very first show Thursday at 6 p.m. at our
Hmm.
Cinemark XD screen with a packed audience, and then I caught it again this afternoon because you can't just watch it once. And if I'm gonna watch it, I'm gonna watch it on the big screen. So while I can, so it was
I
great.
I completely agree. As somebody who's never watched the original Dune,
What?
it's a I've never watched the original Dune, but I understand it's a very immersive and detailed story and whatnot to the point where it's like I'm gonna have to watch that again because there's definitely gonna be stuff that I missed.
Yeah, I mean, all I'll just say about the 1984 Dune is it's trying to do a lot and it doesn't do a lot of it very well. And certainly from my perspective as someone who had seen the original Dune way back in the high school years, I really appreciated what they did with the new Dune because they actually made it work. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, but it also sounds like it's also because they're taking a massive story and trying to cram it into multiple movies instead of one short movie like they did in 1984.
Yes, very much, very much. And let's just hope we get part two greenlit here very soon. So
That's what I'm hoping for, absolutely. So, and going into that, we go into our number one actually this week. Shocker is Dune at $40.1 million. Give us a little bit of insight here, Derek.
yeah, so I was reading a fact today that said that this is actually the highest 3-day opening for a Warner Brothers HBO Max release.
Nice.
There is a caveat with that is that technically Godzilla versus Kong might have been comparable because that opened on a Wednesday of Easter weekend and made 48 million back in that March April timeframe, but still
Mhm.
for a movie like this to open this big, it certainly took me by surprise. I kind of had it projected at in the 30 million range because I
Mhm.
wasn't sure like how much this is going to cross over from the sci-fi and Dune fan base into the general populace. But certainly a lot of people showing up for this. A lot of people wanting to see it on the big screen. I read another fact today that said that of this $40 million, 20 million of that was made by premium showings. So like IMAX alone made $9 million of this
Oh,
figure.
nice.
Also, like your large formats like Cinemark XD, your D box vibrating seats, your 3D showings, because yes, there were actually some 3D showings of this still. Hard to believe, but certainly that also showed that a lot of people wanted that immersive big screen experience, even though, as you can see in the graphic, it is playing on HBO Max for the typical 31-day run. That
Mhm.
dropped on HBO Max Thursday night, the same time that the theatrical showings still started. So I consider this to be a very good start, and hopefully, this is enough to kind of push it over the edge to hopefully finally get that official green light for Dune Part 2 to finish out the story.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's a matter of if we're gonna get that green light. I think it's a matter of when are we gonna get that green light, and I imagine it's probably gonna be pretty soon because I agree. I think this is a very successful. Plus, this doesn't include how many eyes did this movie get on HBO Max.
Oh, yes.
I
Oh, yeah.
mean, you have done your due diligence and seeing all of the dual release films in in the theater. I've been picking and choosing mine,
Yep.
but I mean just just the score and the sound design for this film is worthy of a big screen experience because I don't think that my seat was meant to vibrate like it did because of how much sound was going through our theater when we saw this on Thursday.
Oh, yeah. Just the thunderous drums, the female vocalizing, and of course just all the booming sound of the sandworms and all that. It is an immersive experience. Again, this was one of the controversial titles when the whole HBO Max deal was announced, because Denis Villeneuve was very adamant about people wanting to see this in the theater, even though he did ultimately relent and still allow for that dual release to happen. But again, a lot of people still showed up to see it in a theater, and I think that's still very important. So,
Definitely. I think it's very, very important. So, though it has the HBO Max, I do recommend people go out to go see it in the theater. It's definitely worthy of it. Yeah, and I've heard mixed things about, like, some people think it's absolute trash. I've seen other people think it's absolutely amazing. You and I both thought it was great, and this coming from two people that one's seen the original, one has not seen the original. So, you know,
yeah.
it's interesting to see how torn the general populace is on this.
Yeah, that's why when I saw on Friday night that it got that A minus cinema score, I thought that was pretty impressive too, considering that, without getting too much into spoilers, this is a movie that ends very much halfway through a story,
Mhm.
and doesn't necessarily come to an elegant ending for that movie, but there's enough promise and potential shown in there to still get people excited and think, oh yeah, well, it's definitely going to get tied off, in that part two when it comes. So I think
Mhm.
people are at least understanding of that.
Definitely. All right. So going past Dune here, we get into number two. We get Halloween Kills in its week number two. You and I obviously and clearly not shocked that this is going to take second place to Dune. Coming in at number two at 14.5 million, but with a huge 71% drop, which that is the part that kind of takes me aback, especially for the fact that we're in spooky season still.
Well, I mean, you have to keep a few different things here in mind. First off, obviously, there was a lot of big buildup for that first weekend because, again, this is one of those pandemic movies that was delayed a full
Mhm.
year from last Halloween. So a lot of people wanted to see it right away, get on top of it. We've also seen these kinds of big drops happen with movies that have a dual streaming release.
True.
So that's a little bit to be expected. And then also, of course, with the horror genre, that's another, audience, who comes out to see those titles right away too. So when you take all those factors into account, I guess this doesn't surprise me too much. Now, the good thing is it still has another full weekend, because Halloween is next Sunday. So
Mhm.
it's going to have, 3 weekends to make bank yet. Granted, I'll be curious how well it does, because obviously some people will see this on Halloween weekend, as part of their Halloween celebration.
Yep.
But also a lot of people, do avoid the theaters on Halloween weekend because they are celebrating or they're trick or treating or all that stuff. So I'll be very curious what this does next weekend. I think it's going to
Mhm.
be the most interesting thing to watch. But certainly, it's still doing very well. I mean, this is a not an expensive movie to make. I think it was somewhere in the 20 to $25 million range for
So they're
this.
still doing okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and you bring up a very valid point that I would be kind of curious is that with next weekend being Halloween and whatnot, with this being on Peacock, this is the kind of thing that I could picture somebody watching in the background while they're divvying out the candy to all the kids
Sure,
coming up to the door. So,
absolutely.
yeah, I don't know where I see where this going for week three. So that will be very interesting.
Yeah. Although I will say that right after Halloween happens, this thing is going to fall off a cliff. Come
Hmm.
November 1st, it'll be like, yeah, we're done. We're moving on to, Thanksgiving, Christmas, etc. So we'll see how that does too.
Definitely, definitely. Number three, we have Mr. No Time to Die at $11.89 million in its third week. From week two to week three, only a 50% drop, so not doing too bad. I think we're getting a little bit of that older crowd residual that you were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, again, they're going to come out gradually. And I think we're seeing that here, because again, James Bond is going to be one of those durable brands.
Hmm.
They'll take their time. So I think it's doing pretty good. We're at 120. Spectra 6 years ago that finished at a even 200. So I think if this gets to somewhere in the 150 range, I think that's going to be pretty good considering the pandemic and all that stuff. So
Hmm.
more to come there. I'm also going to mention one random fact here because I think this is very interesting. So obviously in England, this is where the franchise is going to be the biggest.
Hmm.
And even with the effects of the pandemic, No Time to Die is, as of this weekend, the seventh highest grossing movie of all time in England.
Wow.
Um, just to give you an idea, the number one all time movie in the UK, just as it is in the United States, is The Force Awakens. But the number two movie of all time there is Skyfall. And the number three movie of all time over there is Spectre. So they love their Daniel Craig Bond movies. And so I only want to bring that up because, obviously, the UK has had, their own, struggles and whatever handling the pandemic, but the fact that they're recovering and that they've got a movie like this that is performing like a powerhouse over there,
Hmm.
that's a good sign too. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
That is pretty interesting. I mean, there's other movies that I thought would have been up there, but they're going for basically they're rooting for their home team, so
Yep,
you can't argue that at all.
absolutely. So
All right, number four, we have Venom. Let There Be Carnage in its fourth week, at $9.10 million, only taking a 45% hit from week three. So I think in terms of the numbers, this is still holding on relatively strong considering.
yeah, I mean, again, I think again, this is kind of the meeting that comic book movie quota right now. And so because of that, I think it has a little bit of resilience. I if I looked at my stats right, the first Venom that finished at 212 million. So you've got Venom 2 only 40 million away from that point.
Hmm.
It's going to do fine, or at least we'll hold on to some audience next week. And then, of course, once Eternals comes out, that's when the floor is going to fall out under it. But it's still looking like
Yep.
it's probably going to get very close to 200 million at the end of it, which is still great, which is still going to make for the second highest grossing movie post pandemic in the
Hmm.
US, believe it or not, because it's actually, I think it's running neck and neck with where Black Widow is right now. It had passed F9, several days ago. So it's still doing pretty great.
And I do find it just simply just interesting is what would this movie have done in comparison to the original had there been no pandemic? Just because, I mean, the fact that it's running pretty neck and neck with the original is pretty impressive, I think.
Yeah. And again, I think that also means good things because, we've had, like with the exception of say the Suicide Squad, Black Widow did pretty fine even with Premier Access in play. Shang-Chi obviously did very well. Venom did very well. Hopefully that means good things for Eternals in a couple
Hmm.
weeks. That's going to be very interesting to see how that performs because it's going to be very tonally different from other MCU movies. But the fact that you've got people still coming out in droves for these comic book movies, that really helps with the box office right now.
Right, definitely. You know, it definitely is that, and it does kind of feel like the not almost because they almost need to is that the studios are kind of leaning on those fan favorites, if you will, kind of the point where it's like we almost feel like we need superhero movies right now. We need these kind of movies right now because that's what they know will bring in the box office to bring in to help keep these movies sustainable.
Yeah, and I know we mentioned it on a previous show, but when Disney or when Marvel Studios basically said, "Yep, we are putting out four MCU movies in a 6 month time span," there was some thought of, "Oh, that's going to be incredibly overwhelming." But you're absolutely right. This is what theaters need right now, to help get people back into those seats. So it
Hmm.
is working, and that's not even taking into account titles like Venom 2, which aren't part of that MCU plan, but are performing just like an MCU title in that regard.
Right, exactly. All right, number five, we have in its first week, Ron's Gone Wrong at $7.3 million. I wanted to ask you about Dune, but I knew that as early as we went to Dune on a
Yep.
Thursday, I was like, I know he's got somewhere else to go, and it was about 10 minutes later that I found out this is how you followed up Dune.
Yeah, so that was the deal because we got out of our showing at roughly I don't know, about 8:50 p.m. And the second showing of Ron's Gone Wrong that night was starting at 8:55. So that's why I was in a hurry, because I just wanted to knock out both of the new releases in
Yep.
one night and get it done with. So
What would you be able to say for the sake of Ron's Gone Wrong? Like, I'm actually kind of curious about this movie just because it's a kids animated movie, everything like that. I think I might try to maybe see if I can hit it up with the $5 or the $6 Cinemark cheap seat thing on Tuesday and whatnot. Um, what is your overall take of this movie?
I thought this was pretty good. It's we've had fun with animated robots. When I first saw the trailer for this, I got kind of vibes of like, oh, like Big Hero 6 and Baymax type stuff.
Hmm.
With wacky acting robots like this. And this is a very much a different movie than that. That was obviously more of like your comic book actiony movie. This is more just kind of like a boy and his dog type tale, except in this case, the dog is a malfunctioning robot. But it's got good stuff, and Zach Galifianakis is the voice of the robot. He's very charming. Jack Dylan Grazer from Shazam is the voice of the kid. He's great too. Um, you know, this is one of those movies that Disney kind of inherited when they acquired Fox, because
Hmm.
this movie had been in the works for like a couple of years when the merger closed. Despite that, it's very, how can I phrase it? Not unlike with Free Guy, another Fox title. They've definitely have jammed in some Disney franchise stuff into here, because there are like robots that have like Captain Marvel and Black Panther skins. There are some robots that have Darth Vader and Stormtrooper skins. So they certainly did sneak it in there, but it is a very charming movie, and certainly as we talked about last week when we were previewing this, Disney knows how to market this stuff. So I'm actually kind of surprised that this kind of opened as low as it did.
Hmm.
I assume they were promoting it, on Disney Channel and Freeform and Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and all that stuff. But I'm still a little bit surprised that this kind of opened, a little bit lower than I would have thought. But then again, this is, we haven't had a family movie strictly open as a theatrical release recently.
Hmm.
All the movies, well, other family movies as of late, like the Adams Family 2 or the Paw Patrol movie or Space Jam, they've all been doing that dual release type thing. But this is, because it's a Fox movie, it has a very strict 45-day theatrical window. Then it's going to go straight to VOD. And then, as part of the Fox deal with HBO, that'll show up on HBO Max sometime in the next 7-8 months. So it's not going to hit anything like Disney Plus or anything like that. This might have some legs. It's still got a couple weeks to go until the next family movie comes out, which is Clifford the Big Red Dog on November
Hmm.
10th. So it might find some audience there, especially if a family is looking to see something and they've already seen the Adams Family. Especially like maybe even once we get out of Halloween, perhaps. But we'll see.
Well, I mean, here's hoping because, it is one of those ones where it almost feels like, mom and dad want to spend the money to go see Dune, and they're like, "Yeah, we're not going to go to the movie theaters twice this week because movies are expensive enough the way that is." So,
Yep,
you know, maybe this will hopefully, at least ride that number five mark for at
another week
least
or two.
another week. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
we'll
So
see.
that is our top five of the box office here. I did see in the slides here that you did want to bring up another film here, and that was number nine with the French Dispatch. At $1.3 million in its first week, but obviously, as we can clearly see, there's a caveat to that.
Yeah. So there's always been this talk when it comes to like the art house theaters and the specialty theaters, because mainstream theaters, they've had their big ten poles like Black Widow and F9,
Mm-hmm.
and all that stuff, to help prop them back up. But art houses have kind of been waiting for their own blockbuster of sorts. And the general idea here was that, well, if there is going to be a blockbuster release, it's going to be the next Wes Anderson movie, because those always do well with the specialty crowds. And so that's why I wanted to note it here, because this made 1.3 million, but it did that in only 52 theaters nationwide. So
Mm-hmm.
in 12 cities. So your big tent poles like New York, LA, Chicago, etc. So financially, that means that on average, the typical theater that played this movie this weekend made $25,000 just on this movie, which is actually pretty darn impressive. So the fact that it got into the top 10 with very few theaters is fine. There certainly has been a lot of anticipation for this. Again, this was another movie that was supposed to come out like last summer, summer
Hmm.
2020. Actually, this is one of those movies where we had actually gotten a trailer for it um, prior to the lockdown. So people have definitely been waiting to see it for some time. And we'll definitely keep an eye on it because it's going to expand to 600 theaters next weekend in 60 cities. And then it's going to expand further on Eternals weekend, November 5th. So this is going to be lurking probably just outside the top five, but it's going to be running in there for quite some time as more and more people get the chance to see this.
Is there any particular reason why they're, going almost I almost feel like it's like the old school method of way back in the day when they were still churning out the actual film reels to the point where like it's in a few cities and it's getting bigger and bigger, like why they're ramping up that way as opposed to just doing a flat out release?
Well, I mean, all the Wes Anderson movies have kind of had this slow rollout. Back in the day, what they would do is like the first weekend, it would open in one or two theaters in New York, one or two theaters in LA, and it would make like, $400,000, $500,000 that weekend. And then slowly but surely, they would continue rolling it out. Like for like Grand Budapest Hotel, for example, we got it in like the fourth weekend of its release in Sioux Falls, after just slowly rolling out. So if anything, this is going to be running out a little bit faster just because
Hmm.
of the anticipation, just wanting to get it out there, all that stuff. So, but again, and it's interesting to see how these releases play out because again, obviously, release strategies as a whole have changed considerably
Hmm.
due to COVID. But this is still going to be the closest thing we'll have to one of those old-fashioned type of releases for the foreseeable future.
Interesting. It almost feels like by the time they get everything rolled out, its 45-day window will have closed up and we'll be seeing it on VOD.
That's possible. I mean, that might be why they're kind of accelerating it and just getting it out there
Hmm.
to get to that point. But again, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll see how it performs. If maybe it falls apart sooner, maybe they'll do something different with it. But for now, obviously, this is something they want to do to prop up those art house theaters, and get them up and bouncing again. So
Definitely, definitely. All right. So with that, our top five recap of this week. We've got Dune at number one, $40.1 million. Number two is Halloween Kills at $14.5 million. Number three, we have No Time to Die at $11.89 million. Venom, Let There Be Carnage comes in number four at $9.1 million. And rounding out the top five is the first week movie Ron's Gone Wrong at $7.3 million. So I mean, we're getting hopefully back into the swing of things here, and things will start finally getting into a more of a regular role with the box office. I'm looking forward to it. Um, do you have any sort of predictions of what we might come to see here next week here, Derek?
yeah, we've got a few movies in play. First off, we have an anime movie coming out. The new My Hero Academia movie is opening in several hundred theaters nationwide on Friday. And, I only mention it because, back in April, you might recall Demon Slayer, the movie, rocked the box
Hmm.
office. And this movie is not going to do as well as that. But certainly the fact that anime movies have been quietly growing steam, over the past several years when they've put out like an Academia movie or a Dragon Ball movie or Demon Slayer the movie, it certainly has been building up, and we might see a surprise entry in the top five for that. Who knows? It certainly is a possibility because even though people might be doing a lot of Halloween stuff next weekend, anime
Hmm.
is certainly a case where the fan base is definitely going to show up no matter what the holiday.
Yep.
So we'll see how that goes. We have two other movies coming out. The first is Fox Searchlight's horror movie Antlers, produced by Guillermo del Toro, finally coming out. I remember seeing the trailer for this movie in August of 2019, before my showing of Ready or Not, to show you how long this movie has been lingering out there. But yeah, it's a creepy Del Toro produced horror movie starring Kerry Russell and Jesse Plemons. So that should be pretty interesting to see. And then probably the biggest player next week is the new Edgar Wright movie, Last Night in Soho, starring Thomas and Mackenzie and Anya Taylor Joy. Again, not unlike Wes Anderson, Edgar Wright's another auteur, where people will show up on his brand
Mhm.
name alone. So, and I think that'll probably, even though it's not necessarily full blown horror, it's kind of more of like psychological thriller. I could still see it playing pretty well next weekend. So we'll see how that compares. I still pretty much think that Dune will probably still be the number one movie,
Yeah.
but we'll definitely see these movies fill up the lower rungs of that top five.
I definitely. No, when it comes to Antlers, when we started bringing up the fact that it was coming out here this next week, the first thing I immediately thought was I went to go look, like you made mention, is the trailer from in front of Ready or Not.
Yep.
This is the point where like it's been lingering so long. I thought this movie was already out. Like I was looking for like where I could go buy it on VOD kind of thing when people started talking
Nope.
about it again.
Yep.
So it's definitely interesting with that one here.
Yep.
Um,
It'll just be good to finally get it out of the way. That's what I can say.
I definitely I agree, and I'm like and like you said here with Edgar Wright, he's one of those kind of directors. He's made such a name for himself. People will show up in droves to go see his movie, regardless of what kind of movie he's making, because clearly, Baby Driver is in a prime example of that. That was completely different than anything from his work with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, but it was a smash, and I picture this being just the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, Baby Driver was, even by Edgar Wright standards, that was a huge hit. Playing smack dab in the middle of the summer, bringing in tons of crowds. People loved it. Obviously, Last Night in Soho is a much different type of movie than
Yep.
that, but I still think it's going to do pretty well. So fingers crossed.
Definitely. All right. So that is the box office for this week. Hopefully next week, Halloween here, we get to see a very interesting box office there. Definitely come back, check us out, see what we've got going on for next week when those numbers come releasing out. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterbox HQ at Backlot605. Also on Facebook, we have the South Dakota Film Community Group, filmmakers, film enthusiasts, people that just love film. Join the conversation. Um, Derrick really likes to throw out Derrick, you are a resident historian. You like to throw out all sorts of fun stuff of, what this movie came out 20 years ago. It makes me feel old when I see some of these movies that you talk about.
Yeah.
Also, don't forget to check us out on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and clearly, as always, on YouTube here. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, review us, check us out. Let us know how you think, everything that's going on. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. And in addition to the weekly podcast, you can always find my coming soon recap where I talk about not just the new theatrical releases every week that I just mentioned, but also what's coming to streaming services, VOD, special theatrical events, our local repertory screens at the State Theater, all that fun stuff. You'll find it there. Um, Again, also make sure to support the show on Patreon, where you'll find 4 bonus episodes every month, including episodes on the aforementioned Venom 2 and No Time to Die, and recently dropped the episode on Halloween Kills. And you
Hmm.
guys will be recording a Dune episode
We
here
are.
very shortly as well. And then also be sure to come back here wherever you've watched us, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube, because this week's Backlot box office bonus episode, what a tongue twister, um, in conjunction with the main podcast theme this month of Dracula movies, we're going to cover the top 10 Dracula movies at the all-time box office, which will be a lot of fun. So watch that wherever you found this.
Awesome, definitely. I definitely look forward to talking about Dracula movies because I looked at some of those numbers and I am perplexed. So
Yep.
definitely with that here. With that, we appreciate all your guys' time and we look forward to talking to you here next week.
Bye.
Bye.